I did my graduate work in uh, animal breeding, so animal genetics. So I worked with different herds in confinement situations that had alternative breeds, as well as herds that were pasture-based, looking at alternative breeds. Um, and one was a large organic herd that we're looking at some of these breeds. So I'll maybe share some of that information, or at least try and give an overview of some of the breeds that people are using and what's happening in genetics. But I wanted to talk the first part about A2 milk. It's from a genetic standpoint, a lot of people are quite interested in it, and there's a lot of in the past anyway was a buzz about A2 milk. You can find it in stores in California and other places, at least large metropolitan areas. You used to could find it on Amazon, and I don't see it there anymore, but there is a market for it, and it's probably a small one, but a lot of people are trying to breed their herds that way, maybe if there's a market potential into the future. So this is, at least in the Midwest, what it is. Most of the market is in Chicago, big cities. So sort of what it looks like. You can get your A2 milk, and it's right there, almost $14 a gallon. So it is quite expensive, more in line with the organic price as well. And I think most of the A2 milk in the US, at least what's marketed, is coming out of some dairies in Missouri, some grass-based herds in Missouri. So what really is A2? So it really started from this book that was authored by an ag economics professor in New Zealand. It's sort of, he suggested that this beta-casein 7, it's a product of beta-casein in milk. It can be absorbed through the gut wall with this leaky gut syndrome, and it can cause irritants to the digestive system and a host of other diseases, but mostly digestive type diseases that you can see. So really there's many different things that cause it. So you have milk that is a more heavy percentage of this A1 can cause, what's been shown, a lot of different things in the body. Obviously, like I said, most of it is digestive, but there can be some other neurological issues with the nervous system and immune system and inflammatory response, but mostly in the digestive system, because people tend not to digest the A1 quite as well as the A2. So really, what is milk? I think most of us probably know it's mostly water, about 4.5%, which is lactose, which is the sugar, fat, 3.7% on average. Obviously, it differs by breed, but really, about 3% of it is casein, so that's the milk protein, and then there's other things. So if you look at the composition of the protein, so this is our protein in our milk. Majority of it is alpha casein, and then you have about 30% of that is the beta casein, which is the A1 or A2, and then you have about 10%, which is the kappa casein. And a lot of AI companies have had kappa casein genetics in their bull books for a long time, and that's how it's been promoted. And a lot more recently, they're starting to put A1 and A2 into their genetics, and people are starting to select more for A1 and A2. So what really is A2? A2 milk is naturally produced from the cow's milk. It's not genetically engineered. It's there. It's a gene in the protein. So it's recognized that at least the A2 is recognized as being the original beta casein gene in modern cattle. So they've traced it back to many different local breeds and how it's got here. So it's basically a difference in structure between the two beta casein variants can lead to differences in breakdown during digestion. So A1 versus A2. So there's been a lot of consumer reports and some people doing studies that have shown that A2 milk has improved digestion and other symptoms versus A1 milk, people drinking A1 milk. But really the research is limited. Most of that research has happened in in New Zealand, but there's more studies starting to come out that show maybe maximizing A2 milk is maybe better in the long run. So like I said, this is sort of a schematic of how the breed evolution happened. And so you many years ago, you have your cattle, and recently the natural mutation caused it to split into A1 and A2, and most of the so Bos Indicus are Brahma cattle, basically. They got humps on them. They're all A2. It's just that the modern Bos Taurus, or our domesticated breeds, tend to have that mutation where it's moved into A1 and A2. So what about A2? So there is a testing. You can test your animals, and I think I've talked with a lot of producers that are thinking about moving towards an A2 herd, and I think they should at least test some of their animals to see where they're at. So you can get it done with different ways. Obviously, if you use genomic testing with this clarified from Zoetis, that's $46 an animal. You can get a test, or you can just get the UC Davis is the exclusive A2 genotyping place in the country, and it's about $25 per animal to get whether it's A1 or A2 or a combination of both. So there is some testing cost into determining that. So what does the actual A2 gene do? So it determines obviously whether it's going to be an A1 or A2 protein in cow's milk. So every animal has 2 copies of that specific gene. A2 produce animals only produce A2. That's all they produce, and A1 only produces A1. And if you have both copies, A1, A2 animal, you produce a mixture of that type of milk. So it's sort of a schematic, and the reason I talk about this is it might take a while, based on genetic testing or genetics. If you look in the bottom right where we're using A2 bulls, it takes a long time. So if you don't have all A2 genetics in your herds, which I suspect most dairy producers aren't all A2, it just takes a long time to be able to breed that to get a whole A2 herd. So it can take some time, a few generations, to get a total A2 herd, depending on what your genetics are. So it basically shows, if you breed an A2 bull to a A2 cow, they're all going to be A2. But if the cow has A1, A2, then only 50% are going to be the A2 cows. So you're going to have another 50% that are not going to be totally A2 genetics. And if the cow is A1, like most tend to be Holstein cows, you have just one copy of each. So at that level, it can take quite a few generations to get to an all A2 herd. So I think the big take-home message here is that if you're using A2 bulls, it can take a few generations to get to an all A2 herd. It doesn't happen overnight, basically. So what about some difference in breeds? So this was a study from 9 different countries. A2 is in green, A1 is in red. The other ones are different variants of that as well. But basically it shows you that Holstein and Friesian, so Holstein and Holstein Friesian, tend to have a higher percentage of A1 in their genes, so 50%. Jersey has quite a bit of A2. There's still some A1 at low levels. Brown Swiss is high. Guernsey, so predominantly most Guernsey animals are A2. Not much A1 genetics floating around in the Guernsey breed. And the Shorthorn and the Ayrshire are pretty similar for A1 and A2. They did a study in some California herds long time ago, so there hasn't been much research on A1 and A2 genetics in the last 20 or 30 years. So this data is a little bit old, but at the time it basically showed you that the Holstein breed is predominantly A1. Jersey is Jersey and Brown Swiss. There's some high A2 numbers, but they're still 10 to 20% A1 genetics. Guernsey, almost 100% A2. So Guernseys have an advantage there of having very high levels of A2 in their milk. And Shorthorn is about 50-50. So it just shows you between these two breeds that the bad stuff is A1. So only about 35% of the genes in the Holstein breed are A2. And in Jersey, it's about 50%. So much higher level in some of those other breeds. So this was characterized as good and bad. So the Holstein tends to have more bad beta-casein genetics. Jersey, Ayrshire, Shorthorn are about the same, a little bit better in Brown Swiss. And Guernsey is the shining star for A2 genetics because of high levels of A2. There are some other breeds that around the world that people are using, at least in grazing situations, to increase A2 genetics. This is Normandy, so the beaches of Normandy, where all these cows are from in France. So there's over 300,000 Normandy cows in France, so it's quite a large breed. And this breed may rank second in prevalence of A2 next to Guernsey. So a majority of their cows, 80% are tested A2. So it's quite a high percentage of A2, and the breed is known more for cheese making. Fleckvieh, so herds in Minnesota that are using this Fleckvieh breed. So it's from Austria. It's a more mountain type breed. with a little more condition. And Fleck V, there's millions of milking Fleck V in Austria and Germany. In this study that was done in Europe, you can see that Fleck V breed has about 70% A2 genetics, a little bit higher than the brown Swiss. Holstein, at least the Holstein in Europe, have higher levels of A2 than even the Jersey. But again, the Guernsey does quite well for A2 genetics. So at least on the A2 portion, I think I recommend that you test your cows so you know the percentage of A2 in your herd. If it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to select or test all of the cows, but you at least want to know what's sort of floating around in your herd. So you would want to test any if you're thinking about selecting more for A2 bulls. So I would select A2 bulls. So I would select the top ones. So I would first select the top bulls on the list if you're using AI, and then I would select from within the top bulls those that are A2, just to make sure that you're using high quality genetics and getting the benefit of A2. I would use it as a benefit of sire selection instead of using it as the only criteria. So I think some producers maybe get too wrapped up into A2 genetics and want to use that as the only means to select bulls. So they just pick only the bulls that are A2 and disregard everything else. And I think that's maybe the wrong way to think about it. I think selecting good bulls and using A2 is can be a benefit. And I think the last thing is really you need to have a market for your A2 milk because you probably want to get a premium for it. Like I showed before, that there's a premium to that A2 milk. So it's about, when we talk about breeds, they'll breed or for a sort of grazing animal. Longevity, so obviously 5 to 7 years is ideal. The more longevity you can get, I think in a grazing herd, a lot of people strive for longevity. Low somatic cell count. You probably want a smaller and functional cow. So a lot of people choose, if you have a free stall, on the size of the stalls. These are, like I said, not by using AI advantage of a lot of our genetics to produce that ideal grazing cow. So at Minnesota, these are some of the breeds that we're looking at. We're using it in a rotation. So we're using Jersey, what I call Scandinavian red. So it's Swedish, Finnish, or Norwegian red. They tend to be more Swedish and Finnish red in that mix. And then we're using Normandy. So like I said before, the Normandy was probably higher in A2 genetics, and they're also a little bit better for cheese making ability. So I'm trying to develop a sort of breed combination for grass-based production without the use of Holstein, and that can maybe maximize milk production on low grain diets. This is our other group that we're using. We're using Holstein, obviously, in the mix. So the Jersey Normandy red breeds was without Holstein. So I also have a Holstein group with Swedish red and Montbéliard. So Montbéliard is a French breed, sort of like a Fleck V type breed as well. And that's what we're trying to compare. So we have this crossbreeding group, the previous one, and we also have purebred Holsteins in our grazing herds as well. Basically, a Normandy Holstein cow, what it looks like in color. These are some Montbéliard cows on pasture, maybe a little bit more robust type cow, a little bit larger frame type cow, um, but has adequate body condition and can consume a lot of forage on pasture. And then the red cow, Swedish red, on our pasture tends to look red and have adequate condition as well, and pretty decent udders. There's, like I said, Fleck V. Some people are using Fleck V in Minnesota. There's a big contingent using Fleck V in Canada. Fleck V is catching on. These are Fleck V cows that, well, on an organic farm, they feed fresh grass silage, but you can see that Fleck V is quite popular in the Fleck V cow out of Canada, I believe. So there are some herds in the U.S. that are starting to use that, and actually the producers that are using it are quite happy with the Fleck V. So I'll describe a few of the breeds and some of their advantages. So these are sort of brown breeds, Jersey, brown Swiss. You can include Guernsey sort of in the mix there as well. The Jersey and the Guernsey are from the same area of Europe. Jersey characteristics, they tend to be good in calving ease, high fat and protein, increased frequency of black hooves. So there's been some research out of New Zealand that has shown that black hooves are a little bit better for grazing. They're a little bit harder hoof and do quite well. However, there are some negatives. The udders can become too deep with cows that get older. You also have bull calf issue, not much value in the bull calves, which can be a problem and increase somatic cell count in milk. Brown Swiss, they have high production, again, high fat and protein, probably the best feet and legs of any of the breeds, and low somatic cell counts. However, some people don't like the brown Swiss because of the increased body size. They're obviously going to be a larger type cow, and then they have some calf issues to deal with, and some of the calves can be quite stubborn trying to feed. So the red breeds, like I said, these are the breeds that we're using at our research station. Like I said, it's predominantly Swedish red and Finnish Ayrshire now. We did use some Norwegian red in the past. They've since called it the Viking red. Now with the Viking genetics, having that, they're typically medium-sized cows, so around 1,250 pounds mature weight, so a little bit smaller than a Holstein breed. They do quite well for production and high protein. They're probably known for really good fertility. They get cows pregnant. Calving ease, they don't hardly have any calving ease problems. And we see very few calving ease issues. Really, the reds tend not to have any calving ease issues. Viking reds have been selected a lot for low somatic cell score and high resistance to mastitis. They've selected that for many years in Sweden and Finland, so those cows are really good for somatic cell count, and they have long productive life. The NRF, so the Norwegian red, we've gone away from that because there has been a large dose of Swedish Friesian or Swedish Holstein, which was used many years ago. So we've tended to go away from the Norwegian red just because of the higher percentage of Holstein that was introduced into that breed long ago. So what about the Alps breeds, what we call the Alps breeds? So these are ones that we're using. De Montbéliard is actually a dairy breed in France. It's not dual purpose. They like to say that it's dual purpose, but they're just referring because beef price is quite high in Europe, and they get really high call price for dairy cows. cull cows as well as the beef steers. So they get actually meat from the cows. The same in Normandy. They're a dairy breed there, make lots of cheese, and are probably well suited for low input systems, more grass-based herds along the beaches of Normandy. It's quite suited for growing grass many days out of the year, and with not feeding much grain. And then the Fleckvieh is more of a dual purpose type cow, selected more for meat. There is in their genetic index, they have a weight on meat production in there. But you can see these are not quite small breeds. There's lots of cows around the world. These are not small breeds. If you consider the U.S. Jersey population is about 300,000 cows. So you're right at about the level of the Normandy. So the Montbéliard's probably larger globally. And the Fleckvieh is really a large dairy breed in around the world compared to many of the other dairy breeds. So these are some of the characteristics of the Montbéliard: high fat and protein. They have really good fertility. Calving ease is quite well. However, you can get some large, when you cross them with Holstein, you can get some large calves. They don't have a problem having those calves, but it looks a little scary when you get over 100-pound heifer calf coming out. Not many transition problems. They have long productive life, really, and you get the beef value at the end of their productive life by the males or females. The typical Montbéliard, this is a purebred in France. Kind of looks like some of the crossbred pictures that I've showed. They're red and white, but that white face comes through quite significantly. The Normandy, high protein again. So they have a high proportion of casein, so BB, so it's better for cheese making. And like I said before, A2, a high percentage of that. They're very good at fertility and calving ease. They're probably developed more from a grazing ability, and they certainly adapt to other environments. So there's quite a few of them in Colombia and South America. And again, they get value for the cull cows, bulls, and calves. And this is in France, purebred Normandy herd, what a typical Normandy might look like. And the last few slides here, some grazing herds have thought of using New Zealand genetics. So there's a contingency that uses New Zealand because the thought is that they're developed in New Zealand under grazing conditions. They should work here in the US for grazing conditions. So New Zealand are medium-sized cows, a little bit larger than the Jersey. They're more fertile than US Holsteins, definitely. So their fertility is really good. They give less milk volume. However, you notice in the chart, there is a high percentage of North American Holstein in New Zealand Friesian. So about 40% of the genes comes from North America. So they're fairly close to a North American type Holstein animal. Obviously, depending on the situation in New Zealand, concentrate is rarely fed, and the amount of hay and silage fed are low compared to the US, even in the wintertime. So these animals are fed concentrate. So we did use New Zealand Friesian in our herds many years ago, and we've sort of phased that out. We felt that based on our data that we saw, wasn't any advantage in using the New Zealand Friesian. They had less milk volume, they had higher somatic cell count, and they really didn't adapt to the concentrate feeding levels that we had at the time. And but I think more research is certainly needed with the New Zealand Friesian. And this is what, we had a few of them, and that's tend to be what they look like. This was a crossbred New Zealand Friesian Norwegian Red, Jersey Holstein, and so 5/8 Holstein basically, and it looks pretty much like what you would expect a purebred New Zealand Friesian to look like. A little bit smaller type cow, but black and white with a decent udder on her. So that's all I have for the genetics section. I think there's many different breed choices out there, and I think they all depend on the management of the herd, and we're trying to develop some different breeds for genetics, and trying to see which works best from a grazing environment as well as a confinement type environment. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about breeds or genetics or breedings.
All right.
I guess my question is, are we supposed to be choosing, what is it best to choose for the BB or for A2?
Okay, so the question is whether it's better to, if you're thinking of selecting for BB or A2, which would be preferable with, I guess you're talking about future market outlook and which one is actually going to pay you back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, based on probably future market outlook, the A2 is probably better from a marketability. You know, the BB has been around for a long time, so it's you know, if you're making cheese, or you know, some producers have decided to make cheese on their own farm. So for those, I would tell them to use more of the BB because you're going to get more cheese per pound of milk than you would otherwise using an AB. So I think it depends a little bit on the management situation, but BB has been out there for a long time. However, typically you'll find that the cows that are BB tend to be A2 as well. So you can take advantage of both of them if you select the bulls that are BB and A2, and they're out there. But right now, based on the market, A2 is probably the most popular, unless you're trying to make cheese on your own farm.
So I'm wondering, any of the producers or anybody online, or you, Brad, have you had any indication that there's going to be a premium for A2? I've heard some people say that they're moving that direction with their genetics, so I have to think there's a reason for that, but what do you understand about that?
So I think most of the people that are moving towards A2 genetics are doing it in hopes that there will be a premium for that milk into the future. It hasn't quite caught on yet. You know, like I said, it's only in the big markets. So I think you can still take advantage of the A2 if you select, you know, if you're selecting top bulls and use A2. So you can sort of kill many birds with one stone by selecting the right bulls.
Okay. Jordy, yeah.
How much variation in body size and type do you expect using a 3-breed rotating cross system once you get the initial purebreds phased out?
Okay, so the question was how much variation in body size do you expect if you're using a 3-breed crossing kind of rotation once you get your purebreds kind of gone? What kind of variation are you going to have?
So there's not going to be much variation at all. Once you get, you know, a few, you're going to see a lot of the variation in the first crosses. So if you're breeding Holstein to whatever breed it might be, that's where you see a lot of the variation right out front. You get some that look like Holstein and some that look like the other type breed. But once you get, you know, in some of our herds, we're 15 years into some of these crossbreeding plans, and most of the cows are all the same size. They are very similar in body size, and it doesn't matter what breed, what sire breed they are. We're in many different rotations where we have Holstein sired animals, we have Viking red sired animals, and Montbéliard sired animals. They're all the same. The other cross that I have, the Jersey, the Normandy, and the red, I'm not quite far enough into that to notice any sort of variation. However, I do notice it when you throw Jersey in the mix. It reduces the body size quite significantly. No matter where you throw the Jersey is always going to reduce body size, and that can cause some issues relative to variation in size.
Follow-up question.
Do you have advice about selecting sires for artificial breeding in a crossbreeding system when you're looking across different breeds, types of proof information?
So the question was whether you have advice for choosing bulls when you're doing this crossbreeding. And what was the second part of your question?
Basically, make it simple, choosing a bull of breed number 2 to breed a cow of breed number 1. How do we translate the bull information?
So yeah, looking at the bull information, going from one breeding event to the next, choosing different breeds of bulls. Is there a publication where you cover that subject? Because this is more than just regular crossbreeding.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have some extension stuff where I've covered some of that, where we talk about which different breeds you can use. Typically we select, so the sire selection question, we select the top bulls in a breed. That's always the number one. And then we select some of these other things. I pick the top bulls or look at the top list, and then I select fertility and longevity and somatic cell count. That's really what I look for. And maybe udders a little bit. But really, I think when we're doing crossbreeding, I try to keep animals in a rotation. So I always follow the rotation, and some of the rotations that we've sort of developed a little bit based on some trial and error type stuff. We've been at it a while. So we think we have a pretty good handle on how to breed the animals based on where we get advantages in calving ease, fertility, body size, and milk production.
So when you're doing crosses like this, do you give up the opportunity to use some of the genetic or the genomic evaluation tools like Clarified Plus because you're out of the standard breeds?
I'm not quite sure yet on that. I'll let you know. So we're going to genomic test all of our animals at our research center. So 250 milking cows plus all of our heifers, and figure out what the real genetics are and how you might incorporate a genomic test into a crossbred herd with other breeds. So we're going to be doing all that genomic testing this spring in a couple months. So I guess stay tuned.
I'm wondering, when you are kind of building a composite breed in a sense by doing this cyclical breeding, if you lose the hybrid vigor opportunities that are out there, or if it's enough of a mixture that you retain that better than just a regular standard 2A cross.
So with in the long term, if you look at 2 breeding cross, you maintain about 75% heterosis. 3 breed cross is around 85 to 90% heterosis, and 4 breed you maintain about 95% heterosis. So you actually maintain heterosis with more breeds across the long term, and we try to optimize at 3 breeds because you don't get much advantage by going from 3 to 4 breeds, and 3 breeds is probably easier to manage than 4. So, but you do keep heterosis levels high when you use 3 breeds compared to 2.
So I'm just curious, for the dairy farmers in the room, how does this sound to you? Does it sound, I mean, you like your breed, Or does it sound like a lot of complexity, or does it sound like a interesting, useful concept?
We just started trying to three-way cross our Jersey and Jersey crossings. Keep some of the better Holsteins purebred in case we don't like that.
Okay. So we have somebody experimenting with three-way crosses and still hedging their bets.
And we still have Holsteins at our research center too, so we can use them to compare with.
Okay, well, any other last questions before Brad signs off and tries to catch his plane? Okay, Bradley will be joining us tomorrow at the Innisberg Falls meeting, talking about fly management and some other things as well. So thank you, Bradley, for joining us.